In this video, we'll be going over the best cards that have an effect that allow them to special summon themselves from the hand, even if they can also special summon themselves from somewhere else. And at number 10, we have SPYRAL Super Agent. This card has the effect where you can declare one card type and then look at the top card of your opponent's deck. And if you guessed correctly that it was a monster, spell, or trap card, you get to special summon this card from your hand. And then it goes on to have another effect where, if this card is special summoned by the effect of a SPYRAL card, you get to destroy one of your opponent's spell or trap cards. And since itself is a SPYRAL card, if you manage to successfully special summon this card from your hand, you get to destroy one of your opponent's spell or trap cards. And wouldn't you know it, this card is basically the main piece of the SPYRAL engine, as most of the SPYRAL deck revolves around this card or needs it in order to use their effects. And the card this entire deck revolves around happens to be pretty good on its own. It has high stats as a level 4 monster, it can bring itself out of the hand very easily, and gets to pop a card when it comes out. The SPYRAL archetype easily allows you to look at cards at the top of your opponent's deck, so you should be able to guess it correctly every time you use its effect, or at least know what your opponent has for the next SPYRAL card you use, as a lot of them have similar effects of looking at the top card of your opponent's deck. And SPYRAL Super Agent was part of one of the very few Tier 0 decks in the game's history. And the fact that it could special summon itself from the hand so easily definitely helped contribute to that deck's massive success. To know how much of a big deal that is, there are hundreds of archetypes in the game and less than 10 Tier 0 decks in the game's entire history. Although this card is more of a combo piece, and it isn't super good outside of its deck, so it's kind of only the bottom of this list, but a very good card to start things off with. And at number 9, we have Gizmek Orochi the Serpentron Sky Slasher. This is a level 8 monster which can special summon itself from your hand as a quick effect by simply banishing the top 8 cards of your deck face down. So very reminiscent of Pot of Desires, it requires you to banish a whole bunch of cards from your deck where you don't really get to use them as a resource, but it does allow you to do this during your opponent's turn, which is how it's usually brought out. There's not too many cards that can special summon themselves from your hand during your opponent's turn without some kind of trigger. You can just kind of do this whenever you want as long as you banish the 8 cards from your deck. The effect can also be used from your graveyard, which makes it even better, if you have a deck that is fine with banishing that many cards from your deck anyway. This card is almost nothing but an asset since it creates a pretty decent body on the field. It also has another effect where, if you banish 3 cards from your extra deck face down, you can destroy one face-up monster your opponent controls, which is actually a really good effect as well. This effect is reminiscent of Eater of Millions, which requires you to banish a whole bunch of monsters from your extra deck as a resource to special summon it, which that card also qualifies for this list funny enough, but it doesn't make it into the top 10. And the reason the effect to special summon it from your hand is mainly used during your opponent's turn is because it can only use one of its effects per turn. So you can't both special summon this card with its first effect and then destroy a card with its second effect on the same turn. So what players will do with this card is bring it out at the end of their opponent's turn. That way they're able to destroy a card during their turn. This card sees staple play in Grenmaju decks since they're all about banishing cards from their deck for advantage, and that deck also loves to play level 8 monsters. Gizmek is basically a Grenmaju card with how well it fits into that deck's archetype, but it's also good in other decks that aren't Grenmaju. And at number 8, we have Fantastical Dragon Phantazmay. This is a hand trap which can special summon itself from your hand if your opponent special summons a Link monster. Then this card allows you to draw cards equal to the number of your opponent's Link monsters plus 1, where you then have to shuffle a number of cards back into your deck afterwards equal to the number of your opponent's Link monsters. Now notice the plus 1 in its effect. This card allows you to mulligan while going plus 1, which is kind of nuts in Yu-Gi-Oh! If your opponent controls a single Link monster, you get to draw 2 cards and return any 1 card from your hand back into your deck, while also getting this 2400 attack beat stick on the field that you can use during your other turns. And it also has a good effect on the field, where if your opponent activates an effect that targets a monster you control, you can discard a card in order to negate and destroy that card. Now, you won't actually be playing this card just for that protection effect on the field, but the fact that it has that good effect on the field on top of its borderline broken hand trap effect is just icing on the cake. Being able to return garnets back to your deck while gaining advantage is good in basically every single deck. There's a reason this card was one of the most played cards in the game during the height of Master Rule 4, when every deck was playing Link monsters. In fact, the card still sees play even though Link monsters are starting to see less and less play. Link monsters are still pretty good. So good that you're still pretty likely to see at least one in a whole bunch of the good decks you run across. And Phantazmay is just pure advantage. The only downside to it, of course, is if your opponent doesn't use any Link monsters, or if you go first and you have this card in your hand, you can't exactly special summon it since it's during your turn and your opponent won't be bringing out Link monsters. Honestly, the only downsides are not even really downsides. They basically boil down to, well, you won't be able to use it 100% of the time, only 75% of the time. And the same can be said for a lot of hand traps, which isn't that much of a detriment. I honestly thought this card would be banned at some point because of how good that +1 effect is, although the Master Rule revisions did a pretty good job of limiting the amount of play this card sees. And at number 7, we have Red Eye's Darkness Metal Dragon. This card is unnecessarily good for the archetype it comes from. This seems to be a theme amongst Red Eye's cards, where they're either useless or completely broken, and Red Eye's Darkness Metal Dragon fits in the latter category. The effect of this card is very simple. You can special summon this card from your hand by simply banishing one dragon-type monster you control. And then it has a hard once per turn effect where you can special summon a dragon-type monster from your hand or graveyard. Originally, this effect was only a soft once per turn, so the card was used and abused in all kinds of dragon combo decks in the past, in order to cheat the card out of the deck and recycle it as many times per turn as you possibly could, since the effect to just special summon a dragon from the graveyard without a cost was pretty powerful. So powerful, the card was even banned for a while in the OCG, and then the card got an errata, where they simply gave it a hard once per turn on both of its effects. The one that allows it to special summon itself from the hand, and the one to special summon a dragon from your hand or graveyard. It didn't really need a hard once per turn on its ability to bring itself out, but it definitely needed that one on the second effect. Even at a hard once per turn, it's still good and sees play. It was just a little bit broken with that soft once per turn, which can be said about a lot of cards that are on the ban list. Most of them could be taken off if they were simply given a hard once per turn as well. And at number 6, we have Chaos Dragon Levianeer. This card existing kind of single-handedly made it so people stop playing other Chaos monsters, because it just kind of beats them all out when it comes to usefulness. This card can only special summon itself from your hand by banishing a number of light and dark monsters from your graveyard. Then, based on the amount of light or dark monsters banished, it gains one of 3 effects. If you only banish light monsters, you get to special summon a monster from your graveyard. If you only banish dark monsters, you get to shuffle one random card in your opponent's hand back into their deck. And if you banished any combination of light and dark monsters, you get to destroy 2 cards in the field without targeting either of them. The card can't attack the turn it uses its effect and also has a hard once per turn on its effect. So it has some limitations, but all 3 of its potential effects are good. Not a single one of them is bad, which is kind of rare for cards that are able to choose different effects. Usually, one of them is the clear winner and the others are kind of mediocre, but not Chaos Dragon Levianeer. They kind of hit out of the park, giving him 3 of 3 on good effects. If you go first, the hand snipe ability is super good, kind of broken even. If you're going second, being able to non-target destroy 2 cards in the field is obviously good. Being able to special summon a monster from the graveyard with no restrictions, other than it's in defense position, is obviously good as well, especially since it doesn't negate that monster's effect. Most monsters that special summon other monsters from the graveyard have the restriction where they negate that monster's effect on the field, but not Chaos Dragon Levianeer. There are other good Chaos cards in the game, like Blackluster Soldier Envoy of the Beginning, which was even banned for a while. That card is currently at full power at 3 copies per deck and doesn't see any competitive play, basically because there's no reason to use it when you can just use Chaos Dragon Levianeer. Which is kind of hilarious, because Blackluster Soldier used to be a staple card in any deck that played any amount of light or dark monsters. And at number 5, we have Danger, Jackalope. Technically, I have the entire Danger engine at this point on the list because they all basically have the same effect. Where, if this card is in your hand, you can reveal it to your opponent, then your opponent randomly chooses 1 card in your hand to discard. Afterwards, if this card was not the chosen card to be discarded, you get to special summon this card from your hand and then draw 1 card. For some reason, this effect is not once per turn, so if you have a full deck of nothing but danger monsters, and your opponent is unlucky and doesn't pick any of the specific dangers when randomly choosing from your hand, you can kinda just draw through your entire deck on your first turn. Although, since you're randomly discarding cards in order to accomplish this, it's pretty hard to pull off any kind of combo that could benefit from that. Not impossible, but pretty hard to do something like draw Exodia, for example. Although the danger monsters also have a second effect, which is a hard once per turn, where if they're discarded, they gain a different effect. And the effect of Jackalope is to simply special summon a danger monster from your deck. And since special summoning monsters from the deck is the strongest effect of all of the danger discard effects, that's why I have Jackalope on this spot on this list over all the others. But really, which danger monster you use is kind of dependent on what level of monsters you want to special summon. Like Grand Manju decks, for example, almost exclusively play Bigfoot and Thunderbird because they're level 8. The entire danger engine is kind of good. They just add an easy way for any deck to have extra special summons from the hand while not losing any advantage in the process, which is why they have the 3 cards that allow you to gain the best advantage when your opponent does pick the danger monster in your hand, limited on the ban list. That way there's at least a semblance of a downside to the danger engine. And at number 4, we have Magician's Souls. This card can special summon itself from your hand by sending any one level 6 or higher spellcaster type monster from your deck to the graveyard. It also has 2 other effects. One of them is for the same condition as special summoning this card from your hand, you can instead special summon a Dark Magician or Dark Magician Girl from your graveyard at the cost of sending this card to the graveyard instead of special summoning it. And while it's on the field, it has the excellent effect where you can send up to 2 spell or trap cards from your hand or field to the graveyard in order to draw that many cards. And there are even some decks that love to send their spell and traps to the graveyard, so this effect is basically pure advantage in those kinds of decks. The biggest downside to this card though is definitely the Garnet you have to play in order to special summon it, since you need to have a level 6 or higher spellcaster type monster in your deck. For SPYRAL decks, they had access to SPYRAL Master Plan as a high level spellcaster type monster as part of the engine, and basically because Magician's Souls was released, SPYRAL Master Plan got banned because it worked too well with that card. But if a deck doesn't have an archetype specific high level spellcaster, they can just play Apprentice Illusion Magician, which is also a card that can special summon itself from the hand by simply discarding one other card. It's not the best special summon from the hand effect in the world, but it is still useful. So as far as Garnets go, it's probably one of the better Garnets in the game. You still want the card in your deck, but if you do happen to draw it, it's definitely usable to go into combo plays. And with the amount of advantage Magician's Souls allows you to potentially gain, without random chance, and how splashable it is in all kinds of different decks, I think it definitely deserves a high spot on this list, only beaten out by 2 much more heavily used cards and then a beast of a boss monster. And at number 3, we have a beast of a boss monster, Ultimate Conductor Tyranno. This card can special summon itself from your hand by banishing 2 dinosaur type monsters from your graveyard. While on the field, it has 3 effects. One of them is a Spell Speed 2 effect that allows you to Book of Eclipse your opponent by simply destroying a dinosaur type monster in your hand or field. Its other effect allows it to attack all of your opponent's monsters once each, and if it attacks a defense position monster, you can inflict 1000 points of damage to your opponent in order to send that monster to the graveyard. Now, all 3 of these effects are pretty good, especially since it has 3500 attack baseline, which is kind of ridiculously high for a main deck monster. Although that's kind of the point of dinosaurs, they're really the only type of monster that goes above 3000 attack without downsides. And for how good this card is, it's really easy to bring out. Getting 2 dinosaurs into the grave is not hard at all. This card can be searched out very easily with Soul-Eating Oviraptor, and it can target Baby Ceresaurus in your hand with its quick effect in order to special summon a dinosaur monster from your deck, while disrupting your opponent's plays by flipping their cards face down. And then he can just attack over everything your opponent controls pretty easily. This is probably the best main deck boss monster in the game right now, that's also part of a top tier deck, and it's definitely helped along by the fact that it's easy to bring out. A good hallmark of a good boss monster is ease of access with summoning it. If it's too hard to bring out, no one will play it. If it's too easy to bring out, then it'll probably get banned like Masterpiece. Ultimate Conductor Tyranno kind of falls in the latter category, although I don't think it's quite as powerful as Masterpiece. And at number 2, we have framegear Gamma. This card is basically a hand trap with a Solemn Strike effect, where if your opponent activates a monster effect, you get to negate and destroy that card, which is incredibly powerful for a hand trap effect that can be used during your opponent's first turn. And that's basically the best way to use this card, since it does have a limitation, where you can only use this hand trap effect if you don't control any cards on your side of the field, which is pretty easy to accomplish when it's your opponent's first turn. And also, when it does have this effect of negating a monster effect, It also special summons itself from the hand, as well as a copy of Cyframe Driver from your hand deck or graveyard. And because you need Cyframe Driver in order to do the negate, you do have to play a Garnet in order to use this card. And there are some more downsides, where during the end phase, this card banishes itself and the Cyframe Driver it brought out, which means you can't really use it again. Although most hand traps are hard once per turns anyway, so only being able to use a 1 Gamma is not that big a deal, because its effect is so good. If you're able to get the effect off during your turn, you can actually use Gamma and Driver to go into a level 8 Synchro monster, like their archetype-specific Synchro monster Cyframe Lord Omega, which is actually good. Or just Borolo Savage Dragon if you have a Link monster in the grave. The fact that it can get 2 materials on the field is just a nice bonus. Really, the effect of it special summoning itself from your hand is kind of a detriment most of the time, since it means you have monsters in the field and can't activate the cards of other effects that require a clear field, like Infinite Impermanence. And of course, the whole requiring to play a Garnet in your deck, which is totally worth it for the Solemn Strike during your opponent's first turn effect. That can kind of win you games on your own against most decks if you use it at the right time. Most hand traps only negate an effect and don't actually destroy cards, so Cyframe Gear Gamma is kind of unique in that regard. And at number 1, we have Nibiru, the Primal Being. If your opponent has summoned 5 or more times during the main phase, you contribute all cards on the field in order to special summon a super token to your opponent, which has the attack and defense of all of the monsters tributed. And then you get to special summon Nibiru to your side of the field. The card basically completely shuts down combo decks, and is one of the best cards in the game. It's also one of the most played cards in the game, and single-handedly stops a lot of decks from seeing play. Basically, if you're playing a deck that can't survive a Nibiru, then you're not going to see top-tier competitive play, which is kind of why hero decks are in a rut. They absolutely cannot survive a Nibiru. Nibiru is kind of Konami's response to the power creep of the game. They can release stronger and stronger combo decks as long as they release stronger and stronger cards that can directly counter them, like Nibiru, Forbidden Droplet, Lightning Storm, Evenly Matched, Super Polymerization, and Dark Ruler No More. These powerful cards can single-handedly allow you to come back from an almost unbreakable board. And of all of them, Nibiru is the only one that can be used during your opponent's first turn, and can kind of stop them in their traps before they get anything set up. Alright, and that's the list. I don't know how many times Nibiru has taken the number 1 spot on a list so far. This is why I'm going to implement my own internal ban list of cards that aren't allowed to appear on lists anymore. Anyways, if you think there's any cards that special summon from the hand that I might have missed, I'd love to hear about them as well as future ideas for videos just like this one down in the comments. And also, did you know only 38.6% of people who watch these videos are actually subscribed to the channel? I know YouTube always suggests these videos, so there's no need to really subscribe, but I only release these high quality, properly edited videos on this channel, so I promise there's no need to worry about getting flooded with a whole bunch of vlogs about what I had for breakfast in your sub box if you do choose to subscribe.